Hey, it's Jake D. Thanks for coming to check out my review of Umbrella Academy Season 1, Episode 3. Overall, good episode of television. Lots of things that the creators do really well here. No major complaints with how the story's moving or any of the plot points that they've put together in order to bring things together to move us into the second act of the season as we finish this episode. Not the best episode of the season by any stretch, but by no means does it leave you in a lurch or wanting to check out or not keep going through this. Overall, very solid, no major complaints, really just a few minor quibbles here and there. What I like here that we're seeing from the Umbrella Academy overall is they know what they need to do in terms of keeping the viewer engaged with the season while wrapping up their exposition, putting the pieces in place for Act 2, and bringing in some action and mixing up the pace a fair bit in order to ensure that they don't lose you along this journey that they're trying to take you down. First, let's talk about the most important pieces of exposition that were remaining to be laid out for the viewer through Episode 3 so we can really tie that off for the most part and move forward with our story. The probably most important piece that we're looking at here is the opening scene where we get a montage of the story of Vanya's book that's been alluded to in previous episodes. We see Vanya purchase an old typewriter, sit down to write the book, and then give some readings of her book. It's an autobiography. It talks about her life and the lives of her brothers and sisters at the academy. It's a tell-all, and from Vanya's perspective, what happened while they were kids, what they were growing up, and the behind-the-scenes of what was a famous group of people. The reason Vanya seeks to do this is because, as we've seen in the previous 2 episodes, she's just not part of the family. Vanya needs to belong. She needs to find a place and a spotlight and some accolades for herself, and so she goes the route of airing the dirty laundry of the family overall, which sets the stage for our modern-day interactions between the group, where we've seen a lot of friction between Vanya and the other members of the academy as adults. Ultimately, a lot of that had to do with Vanya putting together this book that it didn't show everybody in the best light. The other really major piece of background information that we get in this episode is given to us in a conversation between Allison and Luther, whom we've seen already are very close with one another. They've got a good past. And during this scene, Allison talks to Luther about just what happened that caused her to lose her daughter. We learn that Allison actually used her powers on her daughter in order to get her to obey. And she's really, really feeling guilty about this. Those actions caused her husband to divorce her and made her lose custody ultimately during the court battle, and really drives a lot of her guilt for what she sees as things that she's done wrong in the past. And the fact that she's relaying this to Luther at least shows us that these 2 characters are finding that connection between the 2 of them that has been missing for many of our other lead characters throughout the show. Where this really helps us out is later in the episode, we're going to see a situation where Allison's refusing to use her powers, and it teaches us about why it is that she's very, very reluctant to do so, despite the fact that they may be extremely helpful for us. It's a flaw and a humanizing piece to Allison that truly helps endear her to the viewer and really does make her someone whom I find to be a just intriguing character throughout the show. The next piece that's achieved in this episode that was really, really important was placing all the various pieces to where they need to be in order to continue moving us through the series, making sure that the events can happen, people's motivations are understood, and overall that the coming events are going to make good, strong sense. We start off, of course, with Allison sharing the video of Mom being present while Reginald Hargreaves died. This becomes important because she's now bought into Luther's theory that some type of foul play occurred in relation to the death of Hargreaves. They're not sure if perhaps Mom did it herself. They know that she was present and didn't help him, which we find out later was totally contrary to her programming. So this helps stoke the suspicion not just of Allison in confirming what Luther originally thought, but ultimately the rest of the Academy as well. Vanya is also continually reinforced that she's not welcome among the groups that she wants to be a part of. She sees this earlier in the episode at her orchestral rehearsal, where she arrives late and she's told by the conductor that he didn't even notice that she was missing. A little bit after the conclusion of the rehearsal, she tries to compliment the first chair violin, who tells her that she doesn't even know her name, and that, perhaps eventually she needs to realize, if she's still stuck at third chair, that maybe this just isn't her skill and she should find something she's passionate about. So again, Vanya just getting beat and beat and beat about how she is not a part of the groups of people whom she most desperately wants to. What this achieves for us is it really helps galvanize pushing Vanya to Leonard, which of course becomes exceptionally important, because without that happening, really the events of the series just don't occur later on. As a result of that, Vanya, of course, then finds herself at Leonard's shop, where he invites her in. He continues to really stroke her and groom her for what he wants to see happen. He shares some intimate parts of himself with her, the wood carvings that he's made growing up, and it's his embarrassing hobby. Really brings her in by giving her the gift of the wooden violin player that he made the night before, which of course represents her, and then asks her out to dinner. So Leonard gives to Vanya the thing that she craves most, which is the attention and the acceptance and feeling special, which really is kind of the critical piece that Vanya's missing throughout her life. Allison arrives and tells Vanya that she needs to come back to a meeting at the Academy, and even that piece Leonard's able to turn around and make it helpful to him for his goals and bringing Vanya to him. We also see Five placed in a position where he's continuing to pursue his obsession about the prosthetic eye, and he's begun stalking the lab where the prosthetics are produced in order to try to find out just what's going on, because he's observed that something just isn't right there. This is important in terms of Five's positioning because later in the episode we're going to get a really excellent action scene driven by the members of the Commission, and Five being off trying to chase down the lead of the eye and truly becoming obsessed with that building and what the goings on there, give a good narrative appropriate reason for him to not be present, which matters quite a bit because it gives an opportunity for the other members of the Academy to showcase their powers as they are today, and importantly, it keeps Five out of the fight, because had he been there, there's a good chance it would have gone a different way. One of the things that I really enjoy about this show is that it's not just a bunch of people standing around hallways or sitting around tables talking and moping and feeling sad for each other. And a manner in which the writers have achieved this, particularly with an episode that has such possibility to get bogged down in those kinds of things, is they use Klaus to introduce a fair bit of humor interspersed throughout various points in the show to break up the pace, bring you away from some of the more serious things that they're doing as far as moving the story around, which really helps keep the audience engaged and make sure that they don't lose you. An additional way to do that, of course, is to bring in the action and the fight scenes, which are driven by the commission, really 100% in episode 3. We open up with Hazel and Cha-Cha having some issues with the commission. They've been told that they're going to get their pay taken away from them because they failed to assassinate 5 the night before. And this brings about some complaining from Hazel, in addition to seeing some humanizing points for him, while Cha-Cha, of course, remains very, very laser focused on the mission. Later, we see Hazel into the donut shop, having a real moment with Agnes, and he brings out that famous line of his that I enjoy so much.
Elaborate.
While he's talking with her, in order to, to learn more about her, and, perhaps it's a soft interrogation. Cha-Cha, of course, is having none of this. She comes in, she interrupts this moment between Hazel and Agnes, brings him back on mission, and they get the information out of Agnes related for what their next step is going to be. And that's specifically what the tattoo that 5 had on his arm looked like, which leads them directly to the academy. When Hazel and Cha-Cha arrive at the academy late in the episode, the viewers are allowed to just enjoy a good 7-8 minutes worth of action and fighting throughout. We get an opportunity to see, once again, how brutal and efficient Hazel and Cha-Cha are. We get to see the strength and power of Luther. We get to see the training that all of them have had, whether that be Diego with his knives and his hand fighting, and impressively Allison as well when she goes one-on-one with Cha-Cha and really holds her own. She holds back, and the only reason she ultimately loses this part of the fight is because of her unwillingness to use her power, which, of course, had she done so, she would have easily defeated Cha-Cha. What's great about this is, again, we're seeing the good, hard-hitting action to change the pace. We're exposed to some of the flaws of our heroes, and they are able to repel Cha-Cha and Hazel, but not without taking some damage. And the big moment at the end of the fight is when the chandelier crashes onto Luther. Shortly thereafter, he gets right back up, shrugs it off, and his half-ape body is finally revealed to the viewer. Fans of the comic series, of course, were already well aware of this, but people like myself that are only experienced to the material is through the show, this was a bit of a surprise. I did not expect to see that underneath the cloak. Before I wrap the video, I do want to touch on one moment that I don't know that the writers really earned in this episode, and that was the crushing loss that we see Diego feel when towards the end he makes the decision to shut down Mom, whom Luther is referred to as Grace several times during the episode after seeing her be there with Hargreaves' death. It's a well-acted scene between both Mom and Diego, and you do absolutely experience with Diego that he's crushed, he's hurt. This is something that's the last thing that he'd ever possibly want to do, to shut down this android who everybody calls their mom. The payoff here, though, is just, it's not earned as well as it needs to be. And for me, it would have been better to push this scene out another episode, maybe put it somewhere in episode 4 or even episode 5, rather than bringing the scene in here. Mainly because we haven't seen enough of the history as to why Diego feels so close to her. We do get a brief flashback earlier in this episode where she helps him with his speech impediment and tells him that she's proud of him. But, for me, there just wasn't enough. He talks about how he feels about her, but we don't see a lot of it, and I would have preferred to have a bit more of that interaction brought in before having Diego make the decision to deactivate her, because it would have made it more worth it to me, and the payoff would have been a little more well-earned. It's not that it's poorly done, I just feel that it was a bit premature bringing it in at this point. And again, really good solid episode of television. For episode 3 of a 10 episode run, it does everything that you need to do, and the vast majority of it's done very, very well.